Soldier is one of the most picked classes in TF2. With decently high health, good damage, and a high skill ceiling, it's no wonder so many people flock to play him. Due to his popularity, many have asked, what is Soldier's best rocket launcher? While there are countless tier lists and discussions, the ranking mostly just consists of the subjective opinion of the person making the selections. That just won't do. I want to know what the objective best rocket launcher is, given subjective restrictions put in place by me. But to find which is the best, we first must determine what makes a rocket launcher good. In determining what makes a rocket launcher good, we should understand what a rocket launcher is expected to do by players. I took some time to think and talked with some other players, finally coming up with 4 things every rocket launcher should be capable of. A good rocket launcher should be able to kill players. As a shooter game, one of the class's primary weapons should be expected to kill other players. Secondly, destroying buildings. Explosive weapons in TF2 are best for destroying buildings, as seen with the Demoman, and it should stand that the rocket launcher should do the same. Thirdly, have good movement options, essentially the ability to perform rocket jumps. And finally, being effective at spamming and getting splash damage. The rocket launcher shoots explosives, which means that they have a blast radius, which is great for dealing with multiple enemies, especially in choke points, making them great for spamming to deal with multiple opponents. If a launcher can do these 4 things, we'll say it's an effective rocket launcher. But each launcher is different, and can be better or worse at doing any of these 4 things. How are we going to compare each launcher? Math. The answer is math. By setting a metric to measure each of these 4 categories, we can directly compare how each launcher does. We can then normalize this data, put it into a weighted matrix, and find a score for each launcher. The launcher with the highest score will be crowned the objective best rocket launcher. So let's choose what we're going to use for comparisons. But first, some restrictions. All damage values will assume no ramp up or fall off, no outside buffs, such as banners, ubercharge, or other effects like Girardi, as well no deviation for the beggars, and no random crits. As well, the airstrike will have its values measured twice, once for on the ground and once airborne, and its final values, i.e. its total score, will be averaged at the end. With that out of the way, let's continue. In the case of damaging players, I chose time to kill to be the metric. Intuitively, a launcher that kills people faster would be better than one that took longer. For the numbers to compare, we'll use the time to deal a minimum of 300 damage, which is effectively saying how long does it take to kill a full health heavy. Heavy is the best choice, as its high health will highlight any differences in launcher damage, clip size, and firing speed, making it a good measure to compare against. I chose to use the same time to kill principle for destroying buildings as well, but instead of 300 damage, it would be 216, which is equivalent to the health of a level 3 building, for the same reasons outlined with heavy. We can get the number of rockets to deal the minimum damage n by dividing the health value, in this case 300, by the damage of each individual rocket. In most cases, this will give a fractional amount of rockets, so we'll round up, as rounding down would result in undershooting the amount of damage needed. We can simplify this into a general equation to use for each rocket launcher, H being the health of the target, and D being the damage dealt by each rocket. Now that we have the number of rockets, we can determine the time. An important thing to clarify is that it's not important to know how long it takes for the rocket to reach the target, only the interval between rockets, since as the first one connects, the others will be delayed not by a distance to the target, but by the gap between the firing speed. Using this, and some data from the TF2 wiki about reload times, we can derive these general equations. The first equation is for when the number of rockets is less than or equal to the number of rockets in the clip. Since there would be no need to reload, we can just multiply the number of rockets minus 1, due to only needing the time between rockets, by the firing interval. For when the number of rockets exceeds the number in the clip, the second equation is used. This equation was made to minimize the reload time, which means that it will maximize the amount of subsequent reloads, since they take less time than the first reload. For movement, I decided to compare average damage per rocket jump, as a launcher with a lower average would allow for more jumps in the same amount of health. The last metric was the most difficult to determine, as it depends on 2 things, the blast radius and the splash damage itself. Let's work through this logically, by taking a theoretical launcher A that has a certain radius and damage. If launcher B has the same damage and a larger radius, B should be considered a better launcher, as it would deal more damage over a larger area. Now take a launcher C that does twice the damage as A. C would also be considered a better launcher, as it would deal more damage in the same area. Both values are important, so using one or the other wouldn't be an accurate metric for comparison. I decided to create a different metric, one I'd like to call damage volume. Just like how by multiplying the length, width, and height of an object to find the total amount of space it fills, you can multiply the area of the blast radius by the damage at each point to find the total damage volume of each rocket. First, we need to determine how much damage you'd be taking at a certain point within the rocket's blast radius. I went to the TF2 wiki, but I wasn't able to find anything that was useful for this specific situation, so I had to find the data myself. I took a heavy bot and shot rockets at it from varying radial distances, controlling for ramp up and fall off. Looking at the radii on the TF2 wiki, I found that my results were 24 hammer units larger than the ones recorded. To best explain what I think is going on here, here's a graphic. This point is the center of the target's bounding box, with the sides also shown, and this is the center of the rocket's blast radius, with its radius also shown. As you can see, there exists a 24 hammer unit gap in which the rocket's radius touches the target's bounding box, but not the center. When the radius is in this gap, the rocket will only deal half of its base damage, no matter what. Once the rocket moves into the center region, does the damage scaling with distance come into effect. I used the data I collected and some statistical linear regression to determine a linear equation for each launcher, which relates the distance from the rocket's center to the bounding box in hammer units to the damage taken. Note, I wasn't really able to do this with the beggars due to the RNG of the rocket deviations, so I used the 20% reduction from the airborne to grounded airstrike to determine a ratio and use the stock launcher's data to essentially fudge the ones for the beggars. It sucks, but it's what had to happen. Since the damage is roughly radially symmetrical, we can use the washer method of integration to find the damage volume. But wait, it's not that simple, which is ironic considering all the math, but to get an accurate damage volume metric, we can't just use the linear regression equations. As I showed before, there's a 24 hammer unit region where the launcher will always deal half of its base damage. If we just use the linear regression equation, we would not get the volume that would be encompassed by that region. Same is true for the last 24 hammer units. Due to the player bounding box being 24 units away from the center, at a certain point, the rockets stop being counted as splash rockets and just start hitting the person directly, meaning that between a radius of 0 to 25 of the target center, the rocket will always deal its base damage, which again messes with the washer method. So, we'll have to use a graph like this and rotate it around, using these equations to get the damage volume. Here's what it looks like for the stock launcher. Now that we have all the metrics for all the launchers, let's show you all the data. So now that we have what we're comparing, we must first normalize the data. We want the damage volume to be maximized, so we divide each data point by the largest one to get our normalized values. For the rest, we want them to be minimized, so we'll use this equation to find them. All this normalized data is good, but for the final step we must create and determine the weights for our weighted decision matrix. The weights must add to a total of 1. I settled on the player TTK being at 35%, the damage volume and TTK for buildings both being at 25%, and the self-damage from rockets being at 15%. The player TTK and self-rocket damage were pretty self-explanatory, as TF2 is a shooter, first and foremost. Being able to kill things quickly makes most sense being the most important. Since the gunboats are one of the most commonly picked secondaries, the self-rocket damage values could be extremely mitigated, making it the clear pick for the lowest value. I honestly couldn't decide which of building TTK or damage volume was more important, so I essentially eyeballed it and gave them both the same weight. Leaning hard into the objective analysis, I know. Now, after running the numbers, the results are in. Let's take a look. Using this spreadsheet I made to do the calculations, which I'll link in the description for others to tinker with, it has ranked the top 3 launchers. Coming in 3rd place is the stock rocket launcher. 2nd is the Beggar's Bazooka. And finally, the objective best launcher is the Airstrike? I expected to see stock near the top since it performed mostly average in all the metrics, and the Beggars is usually slept on, being very strong even given its RNG, but the Airstrike being first came as a surprise. Without the averaging, an airborne Airstrike is the best launcher in the game, with the lowest TTK on both buildings and players, Our reduced rocket jump damage, as well, given it still performed fairly well when non-airborne, it shouldn't really be that much a surprise that it did so well. Although it came as no surprise that the rocket jumper was dead last, literally being incapable of dealing damage and technically having a TTK of infinity and a damage volume of 0. Going into this analysis, I would have thought the Liberty launcher would have been the worst damage-dealing launcher, with 25% damage penalty seeming like an unsurvivable nerf. But the Cal Mangler beat it out as the worst. This is mostly due to its near inability to kill buildings. With the building TTK being relatively high, that would account for its poor performance, because on all other levels it should be the same as stock, but heart of the cards. It also seemed that the direct hit and the black box were the most average, being 4th and 5th respectively. Now, I've been calling this an objective analysis, but there are some lofty assumptions made, particularly in the case of the beggars. As well, the scenario is not universal. As well, some aspects of the launchers, like the black box's healing mechanic or the direct hit's conditional mini-crits, would probably alter these results, but were not tested for. I encourage anyone who watches this to go around and play with the spreadsheet I've created, try different matrix values, and experiment with some things. I've had the idea for this project for a while now, and it's taken me forever to be able to actually execute upon it, but I've learned a lot about Soldier in that time and his launchers by doing this. I find myself equipping the airstrike more than I ever would have before, not knowing that it's objectively, in air quotes, the best launcher in the game. I hope you enjoyed this little analysis of a game I'm very fond of. And remember, always taunt after you random crit.